A packhouse is not a hospital for sick fruit. No treatment or process that can be applied in a packhouse, no matter how well it is done, can repair damaged, injured or sick fruit coming from the orchard. Regular orchard sanitation and good picking practices is very important so that we can be sure that there is less chance of fruit being damaged, injured or infected by fungal spores, and arriving in the packhouse in a sick condition where it can spread the fungal spores to the other export fruit. Always remember that fruit is a perishable product. There are 12 different pathogens that we must prevent from contaminating fruit in the orchard. Remember that the word pathogen is used for anything that can cause a disease, such as viruses, bacteria and fungal organisms. Fungal organisms are the sort of pathogen that makes citrus fruit sick. Fungal organisms spread through spores, almost like the pollen of a plant. It is these spores that we must prevent from getting onto and especially into our fruit. The most important pathogens are those that get into the fruit through a wound on the fruit. This can be avoided simply by making sure that the fruit is not injured or damaged during picking, so that the pathogens have nowhere to get in. This is also why it is important that fruit with injuries are not placed with the other fruit, because they may be carrying these pathogens to the packhouse. Then there are also latent pathogens. The word latent means something that is there but not active, and just waiting for the right conditions to attack. Latent pathogens live on dead wood in the trees. When it rains, fungal spores are washed down from the dead wood onto the fruit rind or into the button tissue, where the spores lay dormant until the ideal conditions occur for infection to take place. The ideal conditions for fungal spores to grow are where it is warm and humid, out of direct sunlight. In the packhouse, and especially in degreening rooms, the pathogens will find these ideal conditions. Older fruit and fruit that is picked towards the end of the season is also much more vulnerable to latent pathogen infections. Then we must remember that there are pathogens that live in the soil. If they get a chance to get onto the fruit, they will infect the fruit and start to spread, producing more and more spores. Have you ever seen rotten fruit on the ground in the orchard? Those fruit rot because the pathogens in the soil got into the fruit and started spreading. Fruit fall on the ground for different reasons. They may have fallen off the tree after being stung by a pest insect, or they may have dropped on the ground during picking. Fruit that hangs low in the tree, close to the ground, can also get soil pathogens on them. When it rains, water can splash up onto the fruit, carrying the pathogens with it. We can now start to see what we must do to keep our fruit safe and healthy. Firstly, now that we know latent pathogens live on dead wood in the trees, we can remove the dead wood so that they have nowhere to live. Secondly, we can make sure that there are no branches that can carry fruit that will hang so low that pathogens that live in the soil can get onto the fruit and into the tree by skirting the trees. In the third place, no fruit that has fallen on the ground in the orchard must ever be picked up and placed with other export fruit because it has soil pathogens on it. And lastly, we must make very sure that we remove all the waste fruit lying on the orchard floor often, so that the pathogens cannot propagate in this fruit and stay in the orchard. Also remember that pest insects like false codling moth and fruit fly lay their eggs in fruit. If rotten fruit is allowed to stay in the orchard, the eggs will hatch in the fruit and the larvae will grow. By leaving the rotten fruit in the orchard, you allow the pest insect to stay ready to attack more fruit. Deadwood is twigs, stems and branches which do not have any leaves or fruit on them and that has become dry and hard. Deadwood is normally found inside the canopy of a citrus tree. Deadwood is removed when the trees are pruned, normally just after the harvest. To remove deadwood, you need a pair of anvil pruning shears and sometimes a pruning saw. Take care of your own health and safety while using these tools. They are sharp and they can injure you. Before you start cutting out deadwood, make sure that the shears are working well, that the blades are sharp and that the bolts and nuts are tight. The shears and saw must be sterilized before you start working, because they can spread latent pathogens that may be living on the deadwood that you are cutting to other trees in the orchard. The blades of the shears and the saw must be lightly oiled when they are not being used. The anvil shears are used to cut the deadwood off where it meets the main branch or trunk. If the branch is too thick for the shears, use the saw. After it has been removed, the deadwood must be taken out of and away from the orchard and burnt or dumped. Skirting means cutting off the low-hanging branches of trees. This is usually also done when the trees are pruned. In terms of equipment, you will need a skirting stick to make sure that all the trees are skirted to the same height. This can be any piece of stick or tubing that is cut to the right length, normally between 600 and 800 millimeters. To cut the branches, you will also need pruning shears or a pruning saw. For the softer wood, you may use bypass shears instead of anvil shears. Remember to sterilize the tools and check that they are working properly before using them. Use the skirting stick to measure the skirting height from the ground and cut off the branches that hang below that height, preferably where it joins the scaffold or main branch. But be careful not to remove too much plant material, especially on young trees. Now we look at how to keep the orchard floor free from fruit that can host pathogens. All fruit lying on the orchard floor must be picked up and removed out of the orchard. This must be done once a week during the season and twice a week from after color break until picking in the orchard is finished. A stick can be used to pick up the fruit and place it in a bag. From here, the fruit must be taken out of the orchard. In dry climates, the fruit can be chopped up and spread out to dry in the sun, away from the orchard and not on the orchard floor. But this may cause problems in more humid climates, where the pathogens will still develop in the chopped up fruit. The best practice is to bury the waste fruit at least 30 centimeters deep, at least 400 meters away from the orchard. Fruit that ripens late in the season is not as healthy and vigorous as earlier fruit, and it is risky to export such fruit. This fruit is sometimes stripped off the trees and also disposed of as waste fruit. After picking, all fruit should be stripped from trees, even hard, dried fruit, because these fruit can be infected with pathogens that will hang in the tree until the next season before spreading and infecting more fruit. It is also important to remove out-of-season fruit during the year, starting just after physiological fruit drop in November, when the fruitlets are still only the size of marbles. Out-of-season fruit is fruit that ripens at a different time from the other fruit. They can carry pest insects and pathogens from one season to the next. This fruit must also be disposed of, as we already discussed.